You ever wake up thinking it's going to be a normal day and then, bam, a bulldozer shows up in your driveway to demolish your sister's wheelchair ramp? Yeah, that actually happened. And the woman behind it? Our lovely HOA president Meredith, who had no idea she just picked a fight with the wrong family. What she didn't know was, my sister isn't just some quiet homeowner, she's the governor of our state. But let me back up for a second. It all started with a stupid yellow violation notice taped to our front door. Again, fifth one this month. I didn't even need to read it to know what it was about. I crumpled it up and tossed it onto the pile already growing on the kitchen counter. All of them were about the same thing. The wheelchair ramp we installed for my sister Ellie. Now, Ellie's been in a wheelchair ever since a car accident last year. We followed every rule to get that ramp built. Permits, city approvals, professional contractor, matching paint, the whole deal. But none of that mattered to Meredith. She decided that our ramp was bringing down the neighborhood's curb appeal. Apparently, helping your sister get into her house is tacky now. Another love note from Queen Meredith? Ellie asked, rolling up behind me in her chair with that half smile she gives when she's too exhausted to be mad. She was pulling 12-hour days at work and still going to physical therapy twice a week. She never once complained. Not about the job, not about the pain, and not even about Meredith breathing down our necks. See, here's the thing. Ellie's kind of a badass. What most of our neighbors didn't know was that she'd been elected governor a few months before the accident. We kept it low-key because she wanted to focus on recovering. Honestly, she liked being treated like a regular person for once. So when Meredith kept pulling her little power moves, like scheduling HOA meetings when Ellie was stuck at the Capitol or snapping photos of the ramp from her driveway, we let it go. At first. But then things started to feel off. I caught Meredith measuring the ramp with a tape measure at 6 a.m. one morning. When I asked what she was doing, she just said, "Doing my duty as HOA president." That's when I started recording everything. Every notice, every conversation, every weird little moment, because something in my gut told me we were headed for a showdown. And oh, I had no idea just how far she was willing to take it. The morning it all came crashing down, literally, I watched from the window as Meredith showed up in our yard, dressed like she was about to host a wine mixer, waving some official-looking papers and pointing at the ramp. Behind her, a bright yellow bulldozer, like a real one, in our driveway. I'll get to that in a second. But trust me, if you think this is just a neighborly disagreement over architecture, you're in for a wild ride. This wasn't just about a ramp. This was about what happens when a little power goes to the wrong person's head, and that person tries to bulldoze their way through the wrong front yard. So there I was, standing on my porch in my slippers, staring down a bulldozer parked halfway up our driveway, wondering what the actual hell was going on. Meredith was smiling. Of course she was. That tight, smug, HOA smile she always wore like it was her personal brand. She had her signature red folder clutched to her chest like it held the secrets to the universe, or at least the deed to our souls. "I have an emergency removal order," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "This structure is in direct violation of Section 4.6 of the HOA architectural standards." I blinked at her. "The what now?" She waved a sheet of paper in my face but yanked it back before I could grab it. Classic Meredith. Always ready to quote regulations but never to actually discuss them like a human being. "Look," I said, trying really hard to keep my voice steady. "We have permits from the city. We hired a licensed contractor. The ramp matches the house. It's ADA compliant. The city isn't the HOA," she snapped, and that smile finally cracked just enough for me to see what was underneath. Pure spite. "Your little ramp doesn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. And the board voted. It's coming down." I felt my stomach drop. She wasn't bluffing. The construction crew behind her, two guys in orange vests who looked just as confused as I felt, were already rolling out orange cones and measuring tape. "You can't just do this," I said, voice rising. "This is someone's mobility access. My sister lives here." Meredith shrugged. "She wasn't at the board meeting. She was working. I stopped myself. Ellie didn't want her position as governor used as a weapon. She wanted to handle things by the book, but it was getting harder and harder to play fair when Meredith kept changing the rules. I called Ellie. Straight to voicemail. Of course, she was in a budget meeting all morning. I tried her assistant. Nothing. Her security lead. Still nothing. Meanwhile, Meredith handed one of the construction workers a folder. "We have a receipt for the notice we sent," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Certified mail, 3 weeks ago." I'd never seen that notice. And then, just when I thought things couldn't feel more surreal, one of the workers looked up and asked, "You sure this is the right address?" Meredith's head whipped around. "Yes, I'm sure. Just do your job." But the guy hesitated. He was flipping through the paperwork, frowning. His coworker leaned in and pointed at something on the page, whispering. They looked uncomfortable, like they weren't entirely convinced they weren't about to break the law. Spoiler alert, they were. I pulled out my phone and went live. If this was really happening, the world needed to see it. "My name's Jordan," I said, trying to keep the camera steady, as I filmed the bulldozer revving its engine. "And the HOA is trying to demolish my sister's wheelchair ramp, without a court order, without real notice, and without any legal right to do it." That got Meredith's attention. Her smile faltered for just a second. "The HOA is fully within its rights. No HOA is above federal law," I shot back. "The Americans with Disabilities Act exists for a reason." A few lights flicked on across the street. Curtains parted. Mr. Bailey from next door stepped onto his porch, squinting into the early morning sun. He saw the bulldozer. And Meredith. Then turned and went right back inside, probably to grab his phone. By now, the workers were clearly stalling. One of them walked over and said quietly, "Ma'am, we really need to double-check with the board before—" But Meredith cut him off. "I've handled it." And then she turned to the driver. "Go ahead." That's when the blade dropped. Metal screamed against concrete. My breath caught in my throat as the first chunk of the ramp splintered and cracked. That ramp had taken us weeks to design, build, and get approved. It wasn't just concrete and screws. It was Ellie's independence, her freedom, her dignity. And this woman was destroying it like it was a dead tree limb. "You still have time to stop this," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "You don't know who you're messing with." Meredith didn't even blink. "Oh, I think I do." But she didn't. Not even close. I felt my phone buzz in my hand. One short text from Ellie's head of security. "Help is 3 minutes out. Stay calm. Keep filming." And suddenly, I smiled. Because in 3 minutes, everything was about to change. The second I read that text, "Help is 3 minutes out," something inside me shifted. Up until that moment, I'd felt helpless. Angry, yes. Stressed beyond belief? Absolutely. But now? Now there was something else brewing under the surface. Relief. And a little bit of satisfaction. Because Meredith had no idea what she'd just stepped into. She thought she was crushing a weak opponent. That she could bully us into submission, steamroll, literally, over something as basic and necessary as a wheelchair ramp. But she didn't know who my sister was. She didn't know who was about to show up. I kept my phone steady, live stream still rolling, as the bulldozer kept chipping away at the ramp. Every crack of concrete echoed like a punch to the chest. But I just stood there, filming, waiting. Then I heard it. Low at first, like distant thunder. Engines. Not just one. A whole fleet. Meredith was too busy micromanaging her project to notice the first black SUV turn the corner. Then came another. And another. 3 state police cruisers pulled up behind them, lights flashing. The rumble of tires and the flash of red and blue bounced off the windows of every house on the block. The neighborhood, which had been quietly watching from behind blinds and cracked doors, suddenly spilled out onto front lawns. Phones were raised. Whispers turned into murmurs. You could feel the shift in the air like a storm had just rolled in. "What is all this?" Meredith barked, spinning toward the noise. "This is private property. This is a neighborhood matter." That's when the center SUV's door opened, and out rolled Ellie. She looked different. Not in a dramatic way, not in some Hollywood-style transformation, but in that quiet, powerful way that makes you stop breathing for a second. She wore her deep navy governor's blazer, complete with the state seal, and her expression was calm, composed, and deadly serious. Her security team flanked her, forming a silent perimeter, as she rolled across the cracked driveway, stopping just feet from where Meredith stood frozen. "Mrs. Ashford," Ellie said, her voice sharp but controlled, echoing across the stunned crowd. "This stopped being a neighborhood issue the moment you violated federal disability access laws and damaged state property." Meredith blinked. "State? What?" Ellie pulled out her phone and tapped it. "This ramp, what's left of it, was funded in part by the State Residential Accessibility Grant. That makes it legally designated state property. You authorized a demolition of government infrastructure, without permits, without cause, and without notifying the owner." You could practically hear Meredith's brain short-circuiting. "But the HOA bylaws, my legal team has reviewed your bylaws," Ellie cut in, her tone razor-sharp now. "I'd be happy to go over the long list of violations with you, including financial misconduct, discriminatory enforcement, and multiple breaches of state housing regulations." I caught the expression on Meredith's face through my phone screen. Pure panic. Her two favorite board members, who had been standing awkwardly by the flower bed, were now inching away like kids sneaking out of a party after the cops show up. Then came the knockout punch. "Would you like to review the Americans with Disabilities Act with me?" Ellie continued. "I just signed a state-level expansion of Title II protections last month. It includes new criminal penalties for exactly this kind of discrimination." The crowd gasped. I think someone in the back actually whispered, "She's the governor?" Meredith stood there, completely pale, clutching her stack of violation notices like they might save her from drowning. That's when two state investigators stepped forward, one flipping open a notebook, the other scanning the scene with a professional detachment that made it very clear this was no longer just a neighborhood squabble. "Mrs. Ashford," one of them said calmly, "we need to ask you a few questions about today's incident and about certain irregularities in your financial filings from the past 3 years." I swear the look on her face could have turned cement to dust. As they began to escort her toward one of the SUVs, still stammering about community standards and property values, Ellie turned to face the neighbors. Every eye locked on her now, every phone still recording. "My friends," she said, her voice steady but warm, "this is bigger than just a ramp. It's about what kind of community we want to be and who we allow to lead it." And just like that, the woman who'd spent the last 6 months hiding her identity behind closed doors was now leading a neighborhood revolution, right from her wheelchair, in a driveway full of broken concrete. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't angry. I was ready. The moment Meredith was escorted into that black SUV, the energy in the neighborhood shifted again, this time like a dam breaking. People who'd been afraid to speak up before suddenly found their voices. Mrs. Dean from across the street raised her hand, trembling, and said, "She fined me $500 for putting a ramp in for my husband." Mr. Kim, who rarely said a word to anyone, came forward with photos. Photos of his backyard swing, set being torn down after Meredith called it a visual disruption. Stories poured out like floodwater. Every new voice made the crowd grow louder, stronger, bolder. And Ellie? She didn't waste a second. She turned her wheelchair toward our front yard, where the broken remains of the ramp still sat in pieces. One of the construction workers, the younger one who'd hesitated earlier, looked absolutely sick to his stomach. "You didn't know," Ellie said gently to him as she passed. "But now you do. Be better next time." He nodded, eyes down. Then she rolled straight up to our porch, turned to face the crowd, and pulled out a thick folder from her lap. "I had a feeling something like this was coming," she said. "So my office has been quietly compiling evidence and planning a response." That's when she dropped the hammer. "We're introducing a new piece of legislation," Ellie announced. "It's called the Right to Home Happiness Act, a bill that protects homeowners from HOA abuse, strengthens accessibility protections, and enforces transparency in neighborhood governance." The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others cheered. A few just stood there in stunned silence. But Ellie wasn't finished. "This isn't just about my ramp," she continued. "It's about every fine issued without merit. Every rule weaponized against the elderly, the disabled, the vulnerable. Every board president who forgot that leadership is about service, not control. A few board members, those who had loyally backed Meredith, slipped away during her speech, pretending to check their phones or fidget with car keys. By the time Ellie finished talking, only two were left standing behind her, and even they looked ready to disappear. Then came the real twist. Out of nowhere, a silver Tesla rolled up and parked behind the news vans. Out stepped Tommy Chen, the YouTube-famous civil rights attorney who'd been blowing up online for months with his series on corrupt HOAs. I didn't even know Ellie had reached out to him. He walked up, shook Ellie's hand, and turned to the crowd with a grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I just flew in because I've reviewed this case, and I'll be representing this family in a civil suit, pro bono. And trust me, we're not just going after Meredith. We're going after the entire HOA structure that allowed this to happen." More cheers. Someone yelled, "Let's sue 'em all." And honestly, the way spirits were running high, I don't think it was a joke. But even amid the chaos, there were quiet, powerful moments happening too. Mr. Turner, the Vietnam vet who lived 2 houses down, stepped up and said, "She fined me for putting up a flagpole," said it was aggressive. Mrs. Delgado clutched her husband's arm, tears in her eyes, whispering, "She made me take down my son's sensory play tent," said it made the neighborhood look unstructured. One by one, people found courage they hadn't realized they had. And then, Meredith came back. Yep. The very next morning, like some kind of HOA ghost that refuses to stay buried, she showed up on our doorstep with a cease and desist letter. Claimed we were spreading malicious lies and slandering her professional reputation. Ellie didn't even blink. "You're welcome to leave that with my legal counsel," she said calmly. "He's inside, with the state housing commissioner." You should have seen Meredith's face. Her eyes locked onto the commissioner, who had already begun reviewing every single HOA action taken under her name for the last 5 years. She tried to pivot. "This has gotten out of hand. We're all neighbors here." "No," Ellie cut her off. "We're a community, and communities don't survive under tyranny." Boom. Mic drop. The final nail in the coffin came 2 days later. Ellie's legal team obtained the HOA's financial records, thanks to a few brave board members who finally came clean. Turns out, Meredith had been funneling HOA fine money into her own home renovations. New kitchen counters, backyard patio, even a wine cellar she claimed was for board meetings. The HOA's lawyer quit the next morning. 3 more board members resigned via angry group emails. Somehow those emails leaked, and local news stations had a field day. By the end of the week, the violations office had been shut down, the locks changed, and a new interim board was voted in by unanimous consent at an emergency town hall. You could actually feel the mood shift when people realized they weren't afraid anymore. Ellie? She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She just rolled back onto our lawn and quietly picked up one of the shattered ramp boards. "Let's build something better," she said. And so we did. Neighbors we barely knew came over with tools, paint, flowers. A retired carpenter down the street volunteered to lead the rebuild. Someone brought snacks. Someone else brought lemonade. It turned into a work party, one that felt like healing. And by sunset, a new ramp stood, sturdy, safe, and even more beautiful than before, with lights that glowed gently at night, with flowers painted by neighborhood kids, with the kind of care that comes from people who finally get it. We didn't just rebuild a ramp, we reclaimed our community. The week after the rebuild, everything felt different. It wasn't just the new ramp, though, honestly, that thing was a masterpiece. Local artists had painted wildflowers along the sides, and the solar lights we installed gave it this soft, golden glow at night. Even the neighborhood kids called it the Rainbow Road, and a few of them would stop by just to run their hands along the painted wood like it was something sacred. But it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about belonging. For the first time in forever, people waved when they walked by. They stayed to chat. They brought over cookies or asked if we needed help with anything. The fear was gone. And in its place, community. Then came the ripple effects. The bulldozer company, the same one that had been hired to destroy the ramp, reached out and apologized. Turns out the operator had no idea what he was walking into. The CEO not only issued a public statement but announced a new initiative: free ramp installations for disabled residents across the state. They even started a scholarship fund for students studying disability rights law and named it after Ellie. And me? Well, I got a call from the governor's office. Okay, technically Ellie's office, but she swears she had nothing to do with it. They offered me a position as director of the new state homeowner protection unit. My first job? Teaching HOAs across the state how to support their communities, instead of terrorizing them. Wild, right? But here's the part that really got me. A couple weeks ago, Meredith's, old house finally sold. New family moved in, a young couple, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a grandmother in a wheelchair. You know what they installed the day they moved in? A ramp. Not a single person complained. In fact, 5 neighbors showed up to help build it. That's when it hit me. We didn't just remove a toxic leader. We reprogrammed the culture of our neighborhood. We showed people that rules shouldn't be used to control. They should be used to protect, to lift each other up, to build ramps, not walls. And maybe that's the point of this whole story. Sometimes it takes one act of injustice to wake people up, one voice to say, enough. And sometimes that voice comes from a woman in a wheelchair, rolling right through the mess with a smile and a folder full of receipts. Anyway, thanks for sticking around for this one. I know it was a ride. If you got something out of this story, if it made you feel anything, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I've got more wild HOA stories coming soon, and trust me, they're just as chaotic. And hey, if you've ever dealt with an HOA horror story of your own, drop it in the comments. We've built a little community here, and I'd love to hear your story too. See you next time.